Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending upon what part of the world you're in. If it's Friday, it's the CEO series. Our guest today is Chuck Feltz, who's the CEO of the Human Capital Institute. You saw the ads as we were coming in. And our topic is going to be the changing dynamics of leadership post-COVID. Chuck is currently the CEO of Human Capital Institute, focusing on helping organizations align business and talent strategy to accelerate growth for their clients. Prior to this, Chuck was the president of Korn Ferry's global leadership and development products and intellectual property business, serving many of the global 100 organizations. He has led multiple companies, both public and private, from an international business services startup to Fortune 500 organizations serving the financial industry. He co-authored a book in late 2000. Never by Chance, Aligning People and Strategy Through International Leadership, which became the foundation of the launch of his private business and leadership consultancy, Chuck Feltz and Associates. His work has been featured in CMO Magazine, Marketing Management Magazine, and in the book, Indispensable, How to Become Your Company Your Customers Can't Leave Without, and the Case Behind It. Chuck, thank you so much for being a part of the CEO series.
Hey, Ron, I'm glad to be here. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you. Talk to me for a minute or so, because we were talking before we went live about the webinar you did the other day, and it was basically looking at org strategy and then connecting the people strategy to that, which is where HR needs to sit. So give us kind of some highlights on that.
Yeah, so we ran a 4-hour workshop yesterday. I facilitated that, and the premise is I believe that HR should manage the convergence point of where business strategy and talent strategy intersect to drive value within an organization. So it was really, I guess to simplify it, it would be business strategy for HR professionals. And we spent 4 hours going through some of the more common strategic models, how to do better diagnostics from a strategic standpoint so that your talent strategy is a direct derivative of your business strategy, and then how to manage that on an ongoing basis. So it was great. We had fantastic engagement, a lot of good thinking, and just a very high energy atmosphere. It's clear to me that the focus on business strategy as a driver of talent strategy is exactly the right way to be looking at this.
Yes, yes. You know, I was so excited when we initially talked about that and was in the planning stages, because one of the things I find in doing this work globally is when I have the conversation with human resources people, and one of the first questions I will ask on that first day is, how many of you, if I gave you 5 or 10 minutes, could you write down your organization strategy? And I get a blank look. And that blank look denotes to me that I don't have a clue. So my thought is, if the organization has this strategy, what's the people component of that?
Exactly right. If you have a difficult time describing your business strategy, almost by definition, you're going to have a difficult time creating a talent strategy that's driven by that. Mm-hmm. So we actually had an exercise yesterday, Ron, where we asked the group, and I gave them a couple of examples, to actually what we call say your strategy, and to do it in 40 words or less, and address what you're trying to do, who you're trying to do it for, in what time frame, et cetera. Wow. What's your point of distinction? So I couldn't agree with you more. The opportunity to articulate business strategy is the best predictor of knowing you've got a talent strategy that's directly driven by it.
Mm-hmm. You know, I follow you on all social media, and folks, if you're listening in, follow Chuck Feltz on LinkedIn. He quotes, he posts some of the best leadership quotes, and I'm always kind of a student of those as I read them every day or every time you post. So, what drove your passion for being a leader? I mean, you've worked for high-end companies, you've consulted for all these companies. When did that kind of connect to say, I want to be a leader versus just a worker? I really want to lead something.
You know, Ron, probably, I don't know, 25 years ago, the passion for me is the ability to create and unite teams around a cause. I love that. I look at leadership in the sense of an obligation. So this idea of creating and tackling a vision by assembling a team and having the team be very articulate and understand the outcome and the problems that we're trying to tackle on behalf of our clients. I've just found that to be very attractive. I love the unifying aspect of bringing that together. And quite frankly, I also enjoy growing the teams individually, helping develop the leadership so that they can pursue their goals with regard to leading others. So, it's been a long time. But that idea of leadership as an obligation is critical to me. The idea that some things can't be done if the leader doesn't start them. And that's the obligation part of being a leader is a lot of things can't just happen at a grassroots level. It takes a leader with an articulated vision that's understood by everybody. And everybody knows that what they do every day matters in something bigger than themselves. And that's been very attractive to me over the years.
Okay. So we talked about the HR component, HR understanding strategy. How could we tie something in for leaders so that they understand the importance of leadership? So I say the importance of leadership because just because you have a title, it does not denote that you're a leader. You have a title, but what advice would you give specifically younger leaders who are trying to make their mark in organizations today?
Yeah, Ron, I'm pretty biased on this, and so I think the number one thing to consider is you've got to be worth following. You've got to ask yourself the question: would I follow myself? And I think it starts there. And if you don't know the answer to that, start asking yourself why or why not, and use that as your foundation. And then I think you've got to stand for something. You've got to have a point of view or a vision that is well articulated in such a way that it's attractive to people. It's magnetic for the best people to come join you. So, you want to make certain that you're putting something into the world that's attractive to people and people can understand it enough to see themselves in it and to work with you on that. And that drives how relevant you are. Leaders need to be relevant, and relevance is a direct function of the size of the problem that we solve. The bigger the problem we solve, the more relevant we become as leaders, as companies, and as individuals. So you have to be very clear as a leader what problems you're capable of solving. And when people follow leaders, they do so because they know what the leader stands for, and they want to be a part of going where that leader is taking the organization. And I guess, the last thing I'd probably say is it's as much emotional as it is pragmatic.
Yes.
When you lead, you have to be as thoughtful and pragmatic as you do tending to the emotional aspect and the psychological aspect of engagement with teams. So, those are kind of the takeaways from my time as a leader.
We have Franda Graves who's listening in, and she says, would I follow myself? How powerful it is. Because that's the first thing I thought about when you made that comment. Would I follow myself? So if that's the first threshold, I've got some reflection to do. A lot of reflection to do.
I think it's a good starting point, and obviously the question there is, what do I look for in a leader that's attractive to me? What makes me spend my valuable time following another person's vision and process for how they lead and deal with people? So it's a great foundational point. And I think it's a good starting point for all of us, to make sure that we're really walking the talk that we'll be putting into the world as leaders.
So that's going to require another component. So if why would somebody follow us? How would we begin the process of thinking through listening? So it sounds listen. Yeah, I always listen. Yeah, but are you really listening?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a difference between listening and hearing, right? So you can hear things that you don't listen to, and I'm guilty of that all the time. My daughters would tell me that I hear them talking, but I don't always listen to them. So and that's a good lesson for me. One of the skills, Ron, that I think is really important is you've got to be able to listen for what isn't said. And that's kind of the old version of the old saying, being able to see around corners. Really good listeners can listen around corners. Now, is it harder? Yes. I mean, in some cases it's exhausting because it's much more intense and you constantly have to be checking in to make certain that the read that you're getting or the implications are in fact accurate from the other person's standpoint. So you're constantly actively checking back in. You have to be able to assess the words, the inflection, and the body language all kind of at the same time. And it's even more difficult, when we're doing things virtually than when we're in person. And that requires a high degree of intuition. So I think for me, the key on the listening is, in your mind, come to the point of understanding what is the core message being talked about here. That's especially important if your conversation is a diagnostic conversation that's problem oriented and you're trying to get at root cause or help somebody, whether it's a business problem or a personal problem. And I used to run before I had my graduate degree in business, I did a lot of crisis intervention counseling in a hospital with families and patients. And so that was in my 20s, and that laid a good groundwork for me when people were under stress to be able to understand how you can appreciate and honor the emotion, but how you get through it to get at the root cause issues so that you can create outcomes.
That must have been an experience as you traveled through and moved up the corporate ladder, that you still use that as an anchor.
It was probably the best experience I've ever had as a business person, and it came in a non-business environment.
One of the things I've noticed is that I do a lot of leadership development here in the Middle East, and one of the sessions we will work on is that a leadership lesson. What have you learned from someone, whether it's a past boss or whatever it was? The vast majority of people that talk through that experience, and sometimes they get very emotional in talking it through because everyone has to get up and kind of walk through that. For the most part, it never comes back from a manager. It comes back from, you mentioned your daughter, and I had to get that same lesson whipped into me from my daughter. It comes back to an aunt or uncle or somewhere along the line. So my takeaway from that is that we make impressions upon people, and it is our duty to make sure, specifically people that are coming up, to make sure we're walking the talk, so to speak. Is that kind of a way that you look at it the same way? Because you referenced the hospital situation.
Yeah, I do look at it that way. I think, when you talk about developing people and developing leaders, I had a great mentor earlier in my career who gave me advice decades ago that I've never forgotten. And that is, don't try to develop people in your own likeness. That's especially hard for successful leaders. And I've been fortunate. I've had issues as well in my leadership, but I've been fortunate to be successful. And that tends to have an ego aspect attached to it. And so just because I lead in a certain way, in no way means if I'm trying to develop you, you should lead the same way I lead. People are different. Not everyone values the same thing or has the same vision for where they want to go. So I think if you start with the idea, I'm not trying to make leaders I develop into me. I'm trying to diagnose and help them come to an intentional and conscious understanding about where they want to go. And then I use my skills to help them get there. And I try to do that, I guess, in what I would call kind of a multi-format way, which means as you're developing your teams, there's an academic aspect where you want people to have the intellectual understanding about leadership and development and impact and what that means. There's the situational aspect, which is if you've had good mentors who get you into situations that are developmental in nature and you're put there purposely to develop certain skills, that's incredibly valuable. And then the third component is positional. I was in multiple positions in my career that were created, because I had good mentors who put me into those positions, not to be there for my career, but to develop specific leadership skills, like a turnaround or the first international business that I led. I was put there not because I was good at being an international, because I'd always worked domestically, but I was put there to develop that skill set. So having that portfolio of academic, situational, and positional, for me, has been a really good way, once I determined where the leaders I'm working with, where they want to, what their end state is for themselves personally. And again, I had to get over my own ego, which is, well, I've been pretty successful. I need to make you look like me. And that's just, I found out over time, that's not a good approach.
Yeah, I have a terrific story on that, but I want to go to Alba. Alba Haas says, look at a question here. Can you comment on what she's talking about here?
I can't. Ron, can you read that? I don't see it here.
Oh, I'm sorry. It says why I follow a leader that they're authentic, pragmatic, people-centric, mindful, and set out a clear and engaging purpose that everyone is wanting to be a part of. In other words, a live purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it now. Yeah, I mean, so Alba, to her credit, being self-aware enough to know what traits you find attractive in a leader is absolutely critical. You could ask a lot of people, Ron, what is it that you like about leaders? What's attractive to you? And the answers are so general that you can't really act upon them. Alba's, her inventory that she put forward there is terrific. High self-awareness, knows exactly what it looks like when she finds it. So she's able to be very discerning about those that she honors with following them as leaders.
You mentioned a few minutes ago, you talked about mentoring. You mentioned that a couple of times. Our role as a leader, should we be aware of the importance of mentoring, and how should we kind of view mentoring from a leadership perspective?
So I differentiate between leading and mentoring. Mentoring is a purposeful engagement with someone where you both commit to causing an outcome on behalf of that person, and doing so by lending your expertise and guidance. It's more formal than the general category of leading. So all mentors aren't necessarily good leaders. I believe leaders should be good mentors. And so that I do draw, there's a delineation between both. So certainly if you lead, you can mentor. And I do think it's critical. And I think that it's very important for people to be exposed to success in different ways and from different people, so they understand the multiple paths to success, in this case being a strong, good leader, and that there is no sort of secret sauce. It's a compendium of many things. And the more you get exposed, I know from my standpoint, if you were to say, what's your leadership style and how did you form it? I would say I formed it because I was exposed to multiple leaders throughout my career. And I tried a lot of things that didn't work well, and I tried some things that did, and I finally arrived at my own style. But that was not like that. That was years of multiple exposures.
Kind of building a mosaic of leadership as to what you would need. Situational, I'll use this. So when you were talking a few minutes ago, one of the things I thought about, and this was a story that I tell a lot, when I worked at Martha Stewart, I was the vice president of human resources there. I had a client come in one day, and we were doing a tour of the building because we had some great office space over on the west side of New York. And they said, you know what, Ron? They said, everyone here looks like a mini version of Martha Stewart. the way that they dress, the way that they talk, the look. And that caused me to go back and maybe take a look at performance management, look at new people we've hired. And we had this one question on there. If you had to start all over again, would you hire this person? And the numbers were astounding because the vast majority of people said no, which kind of led me to believe that we were hiring people in likeness of ourselves, in likeness of, in this case, the owner of the organization, the owner founder. We wanted people to look like that.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result of that, we kind of went back and did a complete restructure of the way that we interview people and what we looked for, skills, capabilities, as opposed to a look, an outfit, or whatever it was. Because when she said that, and I looked around, she was exactly right.
Yeah, yeah. It's a hard. It's really a sophisticated, complex issue because what people people don't see your DNA. People see what you do. And to try to emulate somebody when you're not built the same way it's just a hard thing to do, you know. So trying to make you look like me, or you make me look like you, that usually isn't successful in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, by definition, you lack a level of diversity that's absolutely critical to good decision making, good leadership, and being attractive to new talent coming in. Yeah. So I think, I'm going to liken what you just said to, in the United States, when cars were invented, all cars looked the same and they were all the same color. They were all black because there was no competition and everything was the same. And some of the early industrial companies, everybody looked and acted the same way. But we have found over years that that level of diversity is not enough. You can't have everybody be monolithic and assume that you're going to attract the breadth of talent you need to be as successful as you need to be. It just doesn't work that way anymore. Did it work then? Yes. But do we want to become people who specialize in what used to work? No. We want to specialize what works now, not what used to be work. This idea of the old way harder doesn't apply in that regard.
A buddy of mine is the head of a major brand here in customer experience, and we had this conversation one morning over breakfast, and he was talking to me about the inventions, or how the interiors of cars were designed in a different way once they brought women in to design the cars. Yeah, the place that you can put your bag. You had a container here that you could put all your stuff in. Because men designed the cars and everything was in their pockets. Women don't have pockets. And it was the click when the doors close, the click when the doors come up, all that was designed by women. So that ties exactly into what you were saying about how having a diverse workforce, in place. And I know
you're not suggesting diversity is gender only. I know you well enough to know that. Yeah. But, even diversity of thinking, which is usually a result of where you come from as another human being, is incredibly important, because it's, to me, it's less about thinking and more about perspective, because our customers are not monolithic. Yeah. And so, it's the diversity, the equity, the inclusion, that's an incredibly hot topic in our business now. But honestly, those lessons should have been learned decades ago, for the reasons that you were just saying. I mean, that as a movement is, in my opinion, is just late to the game. That's so foundational from my standpoint that I'm surprised it's taken this long to get where it is. And I understand the reasons that caused that, but we've got to open that up, because we're not doing anybody any favors by trying to perpetuate a likeness that just goes on and on and on just because of inertia, not because of good critical thinking.
D&I is a very, very hot topic in the U.S. In the U.S. versus, say, in the Middle East, it's huge here because of the fact that you have women moving into more powerful positions. You have a lot of the countries here in the Middle East are expat driven. 70-80% of the population is based on being an expat, and now they're trying to look at it a different way. Is that how do we bring more nationalities into the workforce, which brings to the other question is that the leaders, how do you develop the next level of leaders, develop people in your team? And I want to say this because lots of times when we have these conversations, people think of leaders as the C-suite or the minus ones, but you could be a supervisor. You're a supervisor, you're still a leader of people.
I could make an argument that if you're an individual contributor, you're a leader by example. You know, you may not be a leader in terms of direct reports, but you could absolutely be a leader by your actions.
Very good point. So how would younger leaders begin the process of thinking through that I have a job to do outside of what I do delivering KPIs, but I need to start developing people around me and develop my team?
I'm going to kind of go back to what we talked a little bit about before. If you've got to have a level of understanding of where your individual team members want to go as individuals. So there's a level of connectivity of just humanness that I think is essential to developing your teams or developing those around you. So it starts first with a level of familiarity and then a level of purposefulness. Now that I know you better and know what you aspire to, what can we agree on is the most critical path for you to get there? And what role can I play on your behalf to help you get there? So we're back to, again, what experiences can I create? What positions can I put you in? What academic preparation can I help you get? To me, this is a very personal bias I have. It starts with knowing the individual enough and for them to be able to articulate where they want to go. So they have to accept that responsibility. One of my best mentors when I was very young said, when you want something for somebody more than they want it for themselves, you're going to have a very frustrating time. And they were right. And so as leaders, not everybody wants to be on the same ambitious path or aggressive path that I might have been in or that you might have been on, Ron. And we have to honor that and respect that. There's nothing wrong with somebody who doesn't aspire to lead, but wants to make an impactful contribution. So we can't impose our bias for ambition or achievement on someone else.
So again, that was a lesson learned from my daughter because she had closed the big deal and she was kind of walking me through it. And I'm proud and I'm saying, wow, you're going to probably get a huge promotion as a result of that. And her question was, what are you talking about? I don't want to be promoted. I want to do interesting work, which is what I did to close that. If they were to come and tell me I got to move up to some title with initials behind it, she said, I probably would quit.
Good for her. Good for her self-awareness and knowing herself.
The other thing you mentioned was understanding the whole person. So my version of that, which I use quite a bit, is understanding the 360 of a person. I mean, people on my team, I want to understand family structure. I want to understand, what motivates you, where you're looking to take it, even if it's not here, versus the 9 to 5. Now, I worked in one region here of the world, and it was all about the 9 to 5. And I could not get them to understand that we've got to think of the whole person as we try and lead people. And I was very, very, very unsuccessful in doing that because theirs was based on the foundation of, at the end of the week, I need this. I need you to meet these numbers. You don't meet these numbers, you're out.
Yes.
And the context of that. So, Mike, can you expand a little more on understanding people that you lead?
Yeah, I think first of all, there's a spectrum of personalness, let's call it, and that is some people interpret that as I don't want to expose myself that much. I don't need to talk to my manager about all of that. We're not talking about a psychological assessment. We're talking about a leader's obligation, which is to know your people well enough, just the threshold of well enough, to help them get to where they choose to go. But that's critical. It's not where I want you to go, even though I'm always happy to express to somebody if I think they've got the opportunity to go farther, but it's where they want to go. And with that knowledge, you then can build the experiences, academic prep, positional progression to help them. And for those who simply say, could you please just leave me alone and let me do my work? That's perfectly fine. I mean, most organizations, those are the people who get the work done.
Yeah.
So not everyone has to be a leader in the formal sense, and you don't have to understand somebody's lineage and their generational, family tree at that level. You simply have to know what they aspire to, and to have a conscious understanding of, if there are things I'm obligated to help you with, I will. And if helping you is to make sure that you know what to do and how to do it, and then to let you do it, that's a perfectly legitimate place to be. I think sometimes I will say myself, I won't expose all leaders to this, but I have sometimes come at this from the standpoint of, you should want to do the kind of things I do. You should want to think about being a CEO someday. That's just bad thinking from my standpoint. And it took me, the intentions were good, but the execution of that was not good. And those were in the days when, people were taught to say they wanted to be leaders and CEOs, even if maybe they really didn't want to be. It was hard for people 20 years ago to say, I like your daughter. Like, are you kidding? I would jump off a building if I had to do that, So it's knowing somebody is not nearly as intense as what it has been made out to be in some cases. You simply have an obligation to know people well enough to know how you help them, how you serve them. I mean, that's the essence of the term servant leadership, is to have enough knowledge to know how to customize and specialize your leadership at an individual level. And when you do, I will say from experience, after having done it badly and hopefully now doing it better, it's an incredibly fulfilling way to lead.
Okay, cool. Let's take a commercial break and then we'll come back right back on that.
Identify and book the world's best speakers for your next event. MENA Speakers is the leading speakers and MC bureau in the Middle East. We bring global talent to the region and have established the region as a key global hub for speakers. Inspire and motivate your audience. Find exactly what you are looking for by working closely with us to assist you in understanding the cost-benefit analysis tied to selecting a speaker for any event. Ensure that your audience is educated, engaged, and empowered. Connect with us for a quick response and tailored advice. Book your speakers now.
Okay, we're back. Thank you. I was thinking over the commercial that we just played of learnings from people before, and I've managed teams that were of a different demographic, different age range. And, when I look back on the work I've done over my career, I learned so much from people in a different generation and their take on things, as opposed to my could have been a fixed mindset over a period of time. I want to think as a more of a growth mindset now, but I learned a lot from that. So as we were talking about leaders and trying to make sure that we're developing our teams and moving our teams forward, could you give us your insights on multi-generational work components, which is prevalent today?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll start with a basic premise. As leaders, our job, our obligation is to manage resources in a way to get the highest return on the resources to create value for our clients. And when we do that, our employees thrive, our investors thrive, and our communities thrive. So I start with that foundation that every person in the organization is an asset. And I mean that not in a dehumanizing way, but in a complementary way. Every person in the organization is impact waiting to happen, impact waiting to be channeled toward a clear and compelling outcome. In that context, because our customers are themselves multi-generational, we have to mirror that. Yeah. It's ridiculous to make assumptions that a constricted view internally will be able to appropriately diagnose problems externally for an audience that's much more diverse from a generational standpoint. The second aspect of that is the perspectives that come from the generational diversity are incredible. I mean, it would be so presumptive and so egotistical to assume that only the newest, youngest leaders had the best perspective, or only the people as old as me or older had the best perspective. Yeah. It's just false. And it's a leader's job to extract the best opportunities, the best learning, the best approaches from each of those. In this case, we're talking about diversity of generation, from each of those generations. So I know for me personally, I've always, the term that's used, which I don't like, but it's recognized, is reverse mentorship. So, especially as I've gotten, when I was younger, I had mentors who were older than me. Now that I'm older, I have mentors who are younger than me. And I'm looking my daughters who are in their mid to late 20s are almost mentors for me. I mean, they're definitely mentors from a parenting standpoint. But it's also, there are so many things I don't know, and so we're barraged daily with so many new things coming into the market that impact our leadership skills, that impact our talent, that you'd have to be pretty arrogant to dismiss that. And listen, I've got as big an ego as anybody, but I'm smart enough to realize that there is an emerging body of knowledge that isn't held necessarily in people in my generation that's going to be critical for us to succeed as an organization. So I take that very seriously. I don't think there's a choice to be, quote, multi-generational in terms of the way you look at things. I think you have to. And if you don't, you're dismissing an incredible, valuable asset. And you're also playing on a level of hubris that I think will come back to haunt you as a leader.
I think one of the things you touched on there that kind of got me to thinking was when you mentioned the customer. Your customer is changing. So if your customer is changing, you're still working from this mindset of what worked years ago. If your customer, it's going to be, you're going to miss that.
100%. And when you miss like that, you are on the road toward irrelevance. And there is nothing. I had a dean of a university that I work with who has a saying. He says, irrelevance is worse than death. And what he means is there's nothing worse than existing and nobody cares.
Yeah.
Whether you're a company, an individual, a business, whatever it happens to be. And he's so right. And so you can only matter on the biggest, most important things if you know what they are in your customer base and you have the kind of thinking internally to adjust and create solutions to help them. To me, it's so self-evident that I'm surprised sometimes we miss that point.
Yeah, well, we miss a lot of points, but again, that comes back to being self-aware that we're picking up signals around that. I'm a big fan of Nat Geo, and I watch all the animal shows, but I've always gotten into the concept of snakes, and they can't see that well, but they flicker their tongue to get a sense of the environment.
Yeah.
So in one of my sessions, I talked through that. I showed the snakes and I said, here's what they're picking up from the environment. What are you picking up from your team? What are you picking up when you interact with senior leadership? Because if you're just going in there and your focus is just on your presentation and you're not picking up signals, trying to understand and dissect what's coming at you, you're going to lose.
Yeah. We've got to make sure that the intake valve is always wide open.
Yeah,
because that's the way we bring the outside voice inside. And that's the way we diagnose the biggest problems those that we serve in the market are having. And that's how we decide what problems do we create solutions for. And like I said earlier, the bigger the problem you solve, the more relevant you are to those you serve.
So we've talked about leaders, we've talked about workers inside of teams, and let's talk a little about HR, because that's the business we're in. To put out a disclaimer, I work for Human Capital Institute, kind of on a global perspective. Let's talk about the Human Resources Department. See, you hear the term seat at the table, and my eyes always glaze over when I hear that. I said, because it's not about having a geographical position. What are you going to offer as a result of that? So can you give us some insights from your side as a CEO, even non-HCI? What do you look for in a senior level peer, C-suite, CHRO? Or what do you look from that HR team to deliver to you? Because we started the conversation around strategy, and then we talked it in through people.
I mean, that's an insightful question. Let me kind of start here. I've never been an HR executive, and I'm quite certain I never will be. So all of my answers come strictly from being a CEO, not being an HR person, which means I'm focused on a return on all of our resources. I'm focused on development, and I'm focused on taking care of clients on behalf of employees and communities and investors. So first and foremost, this sort of, I mean, I've heard the HR complaint about not having a seat at the table for, I don't know, 35 years. You know, I mean, ever since I can remember being a leader, I've heard that from my own team in some cases.
Yeah.
There can't be an environment today where HR doesn't have a seat at the table. To me, that's a given. That should no longer be an argument at all. What should be an argument is, once you have the seat at the table, what's your level of impact? That's the only question in my mind. You can't have the only function in a company that puts their fingerprints on talent across every function in your company. You can't not have them at the table. Now, is it possible to have people at the table in that case who are not competent? Of course, it's very possible to have incompetent CEOs as well. But the argument about should they be at the table is kind of old news from my standpoint. HR has to be at the table by definition. I think from a CEO standpoint, HR has to be treated like any other functional area. They have to be held just as accountable for creating impact as manufacturing, IT, finance, operations, whatever it happens to be. So historically, there's been a sense that maybe we've underestimated HR in terms of their capability to be strategic, to sit at the table where strategy is developed. And we just, I believe we have to get over that. We have to stop underestimating the function. There are HR leaders and practitioners who are incredibly strategic, and they need a venue and an opportunity to display that. One of the biggest issues I've tried to tackle in my career in the companies I've led is, I don't believe HR should be recipients of strategy. Too many times strategy is developed and then handed to HR and they're told what to do. I believe HR, and CEOs can make this happen, have to move to the point of strategy formulation. They have to sit where strategy is created, because for several reasons, but the biggest one is, if their input doesn't come during the formulation process, how many organizations do you know that do strategic planning and then go back and do it again because HR has some things they'd like to add? Nobody plans twice during a year. Right? So that to me is, don't underestimate them. Hold them just as accountable as anyone else, strategically as well as operationally. and then move them farther up the curve in terms of strategy formulation, because it makes strategy formulation that much more meaningful. And if that's done well, an HR professional, there's one question that to me is the leading indicator of how well HR is integrated into the strategy. And that's when an HR professional can say, because of our strategy, our business strategy, here is how we're going to acquire, develop, engage, and retain our people. That to me is the only test that I ever use. If an HR leader cannot answer that question because of this, then I know they're not participating in strategy. And if it's my organization, I change that. If it's not my organization, I try to help them understand how they can get to that point.
Yeah. So normally at the close of our session, I ask for 2-3 things. I think you just nailed it as to what you were talking about. If that question can't be answered. So that really kind of wrapped up everything here that we talked about, because we started with leadership. We looked at different segments inside of the organization, and we closed it out from the HR perspective. And I do want to commend you on the strategy session that you're putting together for HCI, because we need that. And I'm speaking from we as an HR professional. We need that. We need to understand the strategy, because, I talked to the story about I'm asking people and no one understands it. So I said, well, okay, so if that's the case, what is the people strategy? And I get these looks again. I'm like, why are we doing this? What are we missing here?
Yeah. We cannot any longer have business strategy and talent strategy run in parallel, because you will sub-optimize value creation. They have to converge. And when they converge, if you draw a circle around where those two arrows come together, my personal belief, and it's a huge bias and passion for me, HR should own that convergence point. They are uniquely positioned, if they've got the right enablement and they're strategically prepared, to make the greatest impact where business and strategy and talent strategy converge. And there's no, I hear, well, they're not ready for that. They're not good at that. They're not good at that if that's the case, because they are not given the right opportunity from the leadership. So fix it. Because as a CEO, if you say that your people strategy is not a direct derivative of your business strategy, you are by definition telling me as an investor that my return is suboptimal.
Exactly. That nailed it. Chuck, thank you. Thank you so much. I want you to hold on for a second as we begin to close out, but thank you so much for those thoughts at the end. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ron.